My name is Julie Paschkis, and I have been illustrating children's books since about 1991, and I've illustrated a whole heap of books. When I first started, I was writing as well as illustrating, and then for many, many years I only illustrated, and I did like this one with collage, with gouache and ink, with, this was my first one that I wrote and illustrated, the flip book. I've been lucky to have some honors. This one was won a Horn Book Honor Book, and was a New York Times Best Illustrated. So been at it a long time and done a lot of different things. Recently I've gotten back into writing again, and this new one is apple cake. The text is basically a recipe. It's a one recipe cookbook, and this one I also wrote and illustrated as a quilt story because I've been doing some fabric design and making quilts. And today I'm going to show you, just sort of walk you through the process of one book in particular, and it's going to be this book about Pablo Neruda, which was written by Monica Brown. So I'll just sort of show you a bunch of the steps that went into creating this book. And the first step for me with this book was I had done this painting for the King County Library. I called it Playing with Words, and it was a painting that was part of image but also just part words. Laura had written a story about a girl who was bird watching with her grandmother, and the little girl doesn't speak, and I had done this painting for that story, and then I had written a story that I had wanted to illustrate in this way, and I'd sent them to Reka Simonson, an editor at Holt that I've done lots of books with, and she rejected all of them, but she said, you know, I really like the style that you're doing with the words, but not the stories that you're coming up with. And so she sent me this manuscript called Pablo Neruda, Poet of the People by Monica Brown, and asked if I would be interested in illustrating it with that kind of wordy style. And I thought, absolutely, it's just a great story. But, you know, it seemed like those words would have to be in Spanish as well as in English. So right away I signed up for Spanish lessons and started studying Spanish, and also booked a trip to Chile to see where he lived. Every project that I do, I want to do it as thoroughly as I can. It's like a door, and I can walk through it, and the further I get into something, the better the book will be and the more interesting it'll be. And then I do one finished illustration just to show the style that I want it to be. And I painted that. It says, once there was a little boy named Neftali, who loved wild things wildly and quiet things quietly. With this one illustration, I sort of set up the structure, which would be Monica's text at the bottom and my illustration at the top. And I set up the sort of level of realism, which is like a little bit real. They're real characters, they're not cartoony, but on the other hand, it's not a real three-dimensional space. And I set up the way I would use the English and the Spanish sort of intermingling and sort of bouncing off each other. So I sent that off to Reka and heard back like, yeah, we like it, let's go. So the next step is going through the text and deciding on the page breaks. And I like getting them with no page breaks, figuring that out myself. And then I do a storyboard. I take a piece of paper like this and I really roughly draw what's going to go on each page. And they're so scribbly. I never show those to the editor or anyone except my critique group, and they've over the years gotten good at reading them. And that's the point where I really want input, like on whether my pacing, structure, the way I've decided to tell the story, whether it's working. And I work it all out in these little teeny things. And I drew several ideas for the cover. The first one was just a portrait of him. The author did not like that cover, so I ended up painting the painting anyway, and there's the painting. But we used it as the author's note instead of the cover. I do the cover last, And so I mapped it out a little bit more than I did on some of the others. Paral is where he was born, so that's why that's the very first word coming out of his hand there. Once I have all those sketches little, then I do them bigger. Like this is the sketch. Nope, other way. That's the sketch for this one. I put the sketch down, I paint at 100%, so the painting is the same size as the printed piece. And I would actually have painted the paper with water first, so it would have shrunk, and then cut it off the block and lay it on there, and then I would paint really, really, really lightly these lines. I don't do it with a pencil, I do it with a brush because it keeps it alive. Like I find that when I'm drawing it with a pencil and I'm tracing, it just feels traced, you know, it doesn't, the line has lost its vitality. His father was a train conductor, and the words that are on the train tracks were the stations leading away from his house. And I was working on the book, I had lots of his books of poetry around that I referred to, and then also his biography and his autobiography, and I would sort of, each page I would find the poems that seemed to have anything to do with that spread, and also the part of his life that he was talking about, and where he would describe what was going on in his life at that point. And so I refer to those things when I was picking the imagery and the words that went into it. These are gouache, mostly Winsor Newton. They all have a little permanence rating on the back, and I don't ever buy anything unless it's rated at least A. I think some of them might be double A. Yeah, double A or A, but never B. And then I mix them on empty lids from ice cream or cat food. And it's like a watercolor, except for there's some chalk or something in it, so that if you make it really thick, it can be opaque, or if you make it really thin, it's like watercolor, it can be translucent. Like in that flower there where the colors fade into each other, there's a lot of water in that. And then where the words are, and this is like just a greeting card, it's really opaque. Well, I think there's good fear, which is when you're doing something and you don't know how it's going to turn out. And that's what I want, at any rate. I want to just not keep doing what I've always done before, but to sort of strike out for new territory. And that's scary, but it's good scary. You know, it's like, who knows where this will take you? But it's still scary. But then there's the fear where basically there's some imaginary editor in your head telling you that you suck, and basically saying don't even try, don't do anything, just give it up. That's the kind of fear that's worth ignoring, I think. I think every time you make a book, you're setting out on a journey, and when you start out, everything's wide open. That book could be anything. You don't know what it's going to be, or how it's going to turn out, or what technique you're going to use, and you have sort of this whole wide world, and that's where the good fear comes in. And then you start making decisions, and you narrow it down so that each decision you make sort of helps define what that book will be. And then it sort of solidifies into its own being. And as you go on, you have less and less great big decisions to make, and more little decisions to make, like about color or placement, or how one thing connects to the next thing. And I find in the creation of a book, there's usually parts where it's really hard, you know, sort of get stuck, or there's bumps on the road, and then there's other times where it's smooth sailing. but it's really neat when you're done. You have a book and you can have to remember that whole process with. So I just want to wish all of you the best of luck on your journeys. Who knows where you'll go? I hope it's exciting.